started, and I'm sure others will be making their way in. But good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christy Love. I'm the Executive Director for the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and I just want to welcome all of you to today's webinar where we're going to focus on national and local models for supporting professional development in the field of violence intervention. For those of you who may not be familiar with the CJCC, we are a small independent district government agency, and we're actually charged with identifying challenges and generating solutions to really enhance public safety and the fair administration of justice here in the District of Columbia. We work on behalf of our CJCC members, and they include the local as well as federal criminal justice and public safety leaders, and they extend from all three branches of government. The CJCC has 4 core functions. We facilitate automated information sharing among criminal justice and public safety agencies. We conduct research and analysis. We facilitate interagency collaboration, and we also provide training and technical assistance. And so our training and technical assistance is generally in the form of webinars such as this one, where we like to invite local and national subject matter experts who can share promising practices for enhancing public safety as well as justice system operations. We also convene public meetings, and those are designed to really help educate the public on how the justice system actually works, and also to afford district residents and employees and visitors an opportunity to engage directly with justice system leaders. And just as a plug, we're actually hosting a public meeting this Thursday, May 9th, at 6 p.m. It's going to be at the DC Dream Center. There's also an opportunity to participate online. And in that meeting, we're actually going to focus on supervision of justice system involved youth. However, today, our focus is on community-based violence intervention, or CVI. And many of us are aware that CVI efforts, particularly ones that operate in the context of a broader strategy, they have been shown to help reduce gun violence. The District of Columbia employs several different CVI models, including hospital-based violence intervention programs. We have Cure the Streets and the Violence Intervention Initiative. And for the place-based models, each of them has shown some level of success, such that their target areas have either seen reductions in gun violence or smaller increases in gun violence compared to citywide. So today we're going to discuss opportunities to further enhance the effectiveness of violence intervention workers through professional development. We've invited subject matter experts from the district, as well as Chicago and Los Angeles, each of whom has established extensive training programs and academies to support violence intervention workers. We're also excited to have Dr. Joseph Richardson, who will moderate today's discussion. Dr. Richardson's list of accomplishments and contributions is quite extensive, but I'm just going to highlight a few of them today. Dr. Richardson is the Empower Professor of African American Studies, Medical Anthropology, and Epidemiology at the University of Maryland. Dr. Richardson is trained as both a criminologist and medical anthropologist, where his research focuses really on 4 specific areas: it's gun violence, the intersection of structural violence, interpersonal violence and trauma among Black boys and young Black men, the intersection of the criminal, legal, and healthcare systems in lives of violently injured young Black men, and then parenting strategies for low-income Black male youth. Dr. Richardson has been appointed to lead a number of gun violence reduction efforts, including University of Maryland's Progress Initiative, and that stands for Prevent Gun Violence, Research Empowerment Strategies and Solutions. He's the founder and executive director of Travail, or Transformative Research and Applied Violence Intervention Lab. He's the co-founder, co-founding director, and research director of the Capital Region Violence Intervention Program. And this is actually the first hospital-based violence intervention program in the National Capital Region. And then he also serves as the co-chair of the district's Violence Fatality Review Committee. My first introduction to Dr. Richardson was not through his research, but through his award-winning film entitled Life After the Gunshot, which explores the social context of gun violence, trauma, and the intersection of the healthcare and criminal legal systems among 10 young Black men survivors of gun violence here in the district. Dr. Richardson received his PhD in criminology and criminal justice from Rutgers University School of Criminal Justice and his bachelor's degree in African and African American Studies from the University of Virginia. Before I turn things over to Dr. Richardson, I am going to cover just a few logistical items. So first, this session is being recorded. Second, there will be opportunities for you to pose questions or share your ideas. And there are a couple of ways to do that. You can use the chat function here in the Zoom app, or if you prefer to vocalize your question, you can use the raise your hand feature, and we will call on you at the appropriate time. Third, after the session concludes, there's going to be a feedback survey that will appear on your screen. We do ask that you take just a few minutes to provide your feedback on this session, and please do offer ideas for future CJCC webinars. And then finally, in the next week or so, we're going to post the video and key takeaways from this session on our website, and we'll be sure to share those links with everyone who attended. So again, thank you for being here. And with that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Richardson.
Thank you, Christy, for the marvelous introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Whether you're in DC or on the East Coast or in the Midwest, or good morning to my folks on that are coming in from LA. As Christy mentioned, I'm Joseph Richardson, be your moderator for today. But before I dive in, I just want to give an overview of where we are in terms of the field with local and national models for professional workforce development. Over the past decade, community violence intervention, also known as CVI, has expanded exponentially in terms of the investment of federal, state, and local dollars and resources, training and professional development of the CVI workforce, national visibility. As we all know, we have a new White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention that uplifts CVI, and the proven impact of CVI on the reduction of gun violence in our communities. As CVI continues to grow in cities across the nation, the professional development of its workforce is critical to its success. For example, in Washington, D.C., we now have 37 street outreach CVI sites under 2 governmental agencies and 6 HVIPs, which to my knowledge is more per capita than any city in the US. The district has over 300 CVI workers. I was fortunate to serve as an instructor for the DC Peace Academy and the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy, so I have firsthand experience on the need and impact of these programs on professional development. Across the country, we now have several innovative programs designed to enhance the training and professional development of the CVI workforce that have shown considerable success. Today, we are honored to have 4 of the nation's most talented and esteemed thought leaders who guide the work on national and local models for supporting professional development in the field of community violence intervention, gathered around our virtual table to discuss this important topic. We value and thank you for your vision and commitment to the work, and look forward to a robust and informative conversation. But before we begin, I would like to thank the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council for bringing these thought leaders together for this important conversation, specifically Christy Love, Executive Director of the CJCC, and David Merriman, my colleague, who is the Policy and Research Analysis for the CJCC. With that said, I will introduce the speakers for today, and I just want to say, as housekeeping rules, every speaker, every panelist will have 10 minutes to provide a brief presentation of their agency's work. And then we will have, following all 4 presentations from our panelists, we will then have a Q&A, which will be roughly 40 minutes. And then that will open up to a Q&A to our audience, where our audience will submit questions during the chat, which we will pull from the chat for our Q&A discussion from the audience, which will be roughly 15 minutes. So let me begin. by introducing our panel. First, we have Rachel Houston, the Director of Learning for Peace, DC Peace Academy. Vaughn Bryant, Executive Director, Metropolitan Peace Initiatives from Chicago. Fernando Rejon, Executive Director, Urban Peace Institute from Los Angeles. And Kimberly Smith, Director of Programs from the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy in Chicago. We may also be joined by Marcus Ellis, who is also part of the leadership at DC Peace Academy. And before we begin our presentation, I just want to let each one of our panelists know that I will be giving your bios, and then you could jump into your presentation. Let me start with our first presenter, which is Rachel Houston. Rachel became involved in gun violence reduction space in 2016 as a volunteer with the DC chapter of Moms Demand Action. And after Rachel's hometown neighborhood, Tree of Life, Squirrel Hill, Pennsylvania, and the high school that her husband attended, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Parkland in Parkland, Florida, both experienced mass shootings in the same year. Rachel decided she wanted to do more. So in 2018, Rachel became the DC chapter leader for Moms Demand Action. While in this role, she worked hard to show up and listen and get to know the amazing Black and Brown-led local community organizations doing the arduous work of interrupting violence and healing trauma in DC. Rachel is both the director of operations and the co-founder of Peace for DC. Peace for DC works to encourage philanthropy to make coordinated investments to violence intervention, to give DC's peacemakers and community-based organizations the tools they need to build capacity and to be successful in their work, and to co-create DC's next phase of safety, peace, and wellness. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richardson, and everyone at the CJCC. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this. I'm actually filling in for our director of the Peace Academy, Nikita Gilbert, who had a medical emergency and couldn't be here today. And I'm thankfully joined by our executive director, Marcus Ellis, who will be kicking things off today. And I will be joining him in giving our remarks. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Richardson. How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you? Glad
Good,
you're here.
good.
We got 2 for 1 today.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm happy to be here with
DC Peace Academy in the house, represent. So you
Absolutely.
guys can feel free to dive in.
All right, well, thank you. And I'm definitely honored to be here with this amazing panel, and to include folks that obviously we've learned from. I see my brother Vaughn there, who, to be quite frank, as we built out the DC Peace Academy, you were absolutely one of the organizations that we leaned on to get started here in DC. And so, just by way of quick introduction, again, I'm Marcus Ellis. I serve as the executive director for Peace for DC. I think it should be noted that I've been in this position for about 13 months, but prior to, I was in district government for 23 years and was one of the founders of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, which is where a portion of our violence interrupters are funded from, and of course, the other portion from our Office of the Attorney General. And that in itself is a part of what's special and unique about the Peace Academy. Dr. Richardson, you mentioned how many different entities, CBOs in our city are providing on-the-ground violence intervention work. And the Peace Academy is the one place that all of these entities come to for training. In the District of Columbia, we have more than one model that's being operated, but the consistent training provided by the Peace Academy over the course of 14 weeks is that one kind of training ground where all of our community violence interrupters do come together. And, for that 14-week period, we concentrate on a plethora of different things. Of course, we want to hone in on the skill sets of our violence interrupters and continue to give them the tools they need to do this impactful work. But more importantly, even, or at least equally as important, we have a concept of healing the healers. And so what we've done at our Peace Academy is brought in Community Wellness Ventures, who is based here in the District of Columbia, to provide not just one-on-one therapy, but group therapy to violence interrupters who, as we all know, are in community on a regular basis, being impacted by loss of life, by so many tragic incidents that they face as they're out here doing this impactful work. And so we want to make sure that they're whole and that they're ready to go out and return the next day, if need be, to do the work that they do. And so that's a huge portion of what we offer. Another key component, we have amazing local subject matter experts, such as Dr. Richardson, who is what I like to call one of the professors at the Peace Academy. All of our instructors are folks that are locally based for the most part. We even, I see his name on the screen, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that David Merriman is one of the instructors that comes and provides tutelage to our team. And so it's a combination of subject matter experts here in the Washington, D.C. area that build out our curriculum. Dr. Roger Mitchell, who is a former deputy mayor in our city, now at Howard University, is also a key stakeholder in the curriculum that we deliver. And so, over the course of that 14 weeks, one of our primary out-of-town partners, right up the road, but in DC, Baltimore seems like it's miles and miles and miles away. the way that our geographical landscape is, and so ROCA comes in and they provide cognitive behavioral theory to our violence interrupters. Huge portion of how we start the Peace Academy in the beginning. We want to make sure that that is a skill set that our violence interrupters not just have in terms of themselves, but that they can pass on to the clients that they serve. And so we just celebrated our 6th cohort's graduation just last week, as a matter of fact. And so we are now right around a little bit over 150 violence interrupters that we've trained here in the District of Columbia, with a new cohort starting in May. Not a lot of downtime in between. We'll be back active in 3 weeks with another cohort of 25. Happy to say that we are now moving into a location with So Others Might Eat here in the District of Columbia, an organization that's also focused and doing some really good work. Will be our partner in providing us a facility to be able to host our programming. And so, a lot of positive things happening. One of our pushes here in the district, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, is to make sure that our Peace Academy is a place that all violence interrupters are coming to as a part of being a violence interrupter in the District of Columbia. Right now, this is a system where the community violence interrupters that come to our program are nominated by their organization, and this can be CBOs, this can be government. And that's the format in which this cohort of 25 is selected. But we really no different than the police, right? They have an academy, and before you go to actually do the work of being a police officer, you come through an academy first. And that's what we aim to be here in the District of Columbia. We are serving in that role now, but we want to make it more of a part of the public safety ecosystem here in the district. And so I'll pause there. I don't know if I used up all of my 10 minutes, but hopefully that gives you a good overview of the work we're doing here in DC. Thank you.
And I'll just add really briefly, I want to lift up not only Vonda Metropolitan Peace Academy, but also Fernando Berjón and Urban Peace Institute. They were both really instrumental in helping us start the Peace Academy. And I think the way it was created was somewhat unique in that we really, leaned on these experts who had already created these amazing models, but then we also partnered with and lifted up the community-based organizations doing this work and the expert practitioners leading this work in DC, and talk with them about, what are the topics that DC's violence intervention workers should be learning about, and who are the best teachers locally to teach these topics. So that's something that we're really grounded in. And also wanted to just mention, you talked about community wellness centers. We also have life coaches for each of the students through the Love More movement, which is another local community-based organization. And as we come up on the 2-year birthday of the program, we're really focused on looking ahead, continuing to try to achieve accreditation for the program, continuing to try to find ways to further engage alumni and build the cohesion among the alumni that they really value in the classroom, and think of ways, to provide continuing education.
Thank you, Rachel and Marcus. I went a little bit out of order because I wasn't sure, Marcus, whether we were going to be able to keep you on. We heard that you only had a limited amount of time, and we definitely wanted to shine light on you and Rachel as well. So we went a little bit out of order to let DC go first, but hopefully you can stay on with us throughout the length of this conversation. But that being said, I would like to introduce our next panelist, Kimberly Smith, who is the Director of Programs for the University of Chicago's Crime Lab's Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy. Kim Smith is Director of Programs for the Chicago Crime Lab and Education Lab, where she works across a portfolio of research projects in close partnership with government agencies and local nonprofits. She works extensively in the Crime Lab's efforts to make data more accessible to the public, most recently by supporting the development of the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy. Prior to joining the Crime Lab, she worked at Innovations for Poverty Action, a research organization dedicated to discovering and advancing what works to improve the lives of people living in poverty. Kim was one of Crane Chicago's Business 40 Under 40 in 2022, and a fellow in the 2023 class of Leadership Greater Chicago. Kim holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in economics from McGill University. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. Such a tough act to follow, but I will do my best. Really excited to be invited here to talk about some of the work happening at the University of Chicago Crime Lab, specifically the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy, which truly does stand on the shoulders of the efforts of those represented on this call. So I do have a few slides. I hope you all can see them. Thumbs up. Okay, great. So I'll just go quickly over some of what we're doing with the CVI Leadership Academy, and I'm excited to have more discussion during question and answer. So briefly about the University of Chicago Crime Lab. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research center based at the University of Chicago. And as Dr. Richardson shared, we partner with the public sector and nonprofit organizations to design, test, and scale innovations that can simultaneously reduce the challenge of gun violence in America, while also making sure that we're working towards a criminal justice system that is truly just. Oftentimes, those two goals are pitted against each other, and we believe it's a false choice. You can have a just criminal justice system, and we can have safer communities. So making sure that we're working towards both at the same time. 2 years ago, we announced the launch of the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy, which is the first of its kind in a number of ways. It is based at the University of Chicago. So in addition to making sure that research is done in partnership with nonprofit organizations, with government, we also want to make sure that academic institutions are sharing some of what they do best with CVI organizations, and that is delivering a world-class education. So the CVI Leadership Academy is based at a university, and its goal is truly to deepen the leadership and management practices of CVI leaders. Over the course of the program, individuals in the class are taking sessions or getting instruction on personal and organizational leadership. What is your leadership style? How do you motivate those who work with you? What is your relationship like with other aspects of the CVI ecosystem in your city? Strategic decision-making. How do you make tough decisions? What information are you soliciting from your colleagues, from your mentors? And how does that factor into decisions that are made at the organizational level? Building healthy communities, ensuring that all of our students have a deep understanding of the social determinants of health, the root causes of gun violence, and how their particular organizations fit into that larger CVI ecosystem. We also spend a lot of time talking about CVI strategies, so thinking about street outreach, HVIP, cognitive behavioral interventions, school-based strategies, reentry, the whole kind of gamut of strategies. Community engagement. What does power mapping look like? How do you build coalitions in your city, across cities, to increase awareness and excitement about CVI? What does it look like to engage with public sector officials? What are the different levers to take advantage of in order to increase funding and awareness of the value of CVI as a part of a public safety ecosystem? And then finally, we spend a lot of time on operations and management. So budgeting, compliance, fundraising strategies, HR practices for a non-traditional workforce. And the goal of really bringing all of these things together is to make sure that we're supporting CVI leaders so that they can manage and then implement CVI at scale. At the culmination of this program, it's a 5-month program, our students deliver capstone presentations, and those capstone presentations are really a reflection of a specific challenge that they're working through with their organization. Whether it's designing a new wellness policy for staff, or implementing a new data management system so that they can track how their participants and clients are moving through services. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the incredible team that created this curriculum that we're so honored and humbled to be able to try to implement. So over 12 months, this group of nationally respected interdisciplinary leaders work together to identify which modules need to be prominent in the curriculum. What are the different modalities of learning that are important to incorporate into the curriculum? How can we mix classroom instruction with immersive experience so that you can really apply what you're learning in a real world setting? So we're incredibly grateful to this group of 8. And I also do want to acknowledge that Deputy Director of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, Gregory Jackson, was also a founding member of the CVI LA Steering Committee. So in terms of, what does this look like? What are the logistics? It's a 5-month program. And over those 5 months, during a week, a month, our students are coming together to be in the same place. Which is really exciting. Because it's a national program, it was really important for us to have that in-person week during each of those months. Over that time, our students have access to advisors from the field of CVI who have held different types of leadership positions in government, in philanthropy, running and starting nonprofit organizations. And those advisors are ideally a resource that can, be drawn upon even after the academy has ended. I mentioned there is a combination of classroom and immersive learning. And as a research organization, we really do want to make sure that we're improving upon the curriculum, the kind of modalities of learning, and generating evidence about how this program is impacting outcomes. So as part of that, we are evaluating the program to see how does participation in the academy impact an organization's ability to deliver high quality services, to secure funding from various sources, to support their workforce, and even develop additional leaders within their organizations. It's a national academy, so we welcome applications from all over the country. During our first cohort, we were able to invite 31 CVI leaders from around the country representing 22 different cities. And this is a kind of map view of where those students are coming from. I think I saw 2 of them on this call, so I want to acknowledge Dr. Sherry and Lupe for joining. And we are just about to welcome our second cohort to the CVI Leadership Academy. The second cohort will include 34 leaders from around 20 cities, and we will be kicking off on May 20th. Excitingly, we were able to celebrate our first cohort in February at the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris and the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention hosted the graduation ceremony. It was great to spend the week in DC. We heard a lot about the great work that is happening at Peace DC, and we're really excited that one of our students, Jovan Davis, was in that first cohort. So I'll stop there, and maybe the last thing I'll say is that we anticipate opening the application for the third cohort this late summer. So please keep an eye out for that. In terms of the folks that we're looking for, we really are focusing on the leadership of CVI organizations, understanding that CVI orgs have not received nearly the amount of investment that is needed to really develop robust infrastructure, especially when compared to other types of organizations in the CVI infrastructure ecosystem. So we're intentionally focusing on the leadership, both hoping that some of the content that we're delivering will be helpful, but also, and potentially more importantly, trying to ensure that they have a network of peers that they can draw on as they're facing challenges in their city. It can be really lonely to be a leader. So hoping that this network of leaders that we're bringing together will lead to more, more outcomes that are conducive to safe communities. So with that, I will turn over screen share ability, but happy to answer questions now or via email afterwards.
Thank you so much, Kim. And if you have any questions that you would like to pose, please place your questions in the chat. Our next panelist is Fernando Rejon, who is the Executive Director of the Urban Peace Institute. Fernando Rejon serves as the Executive Director after building the Urban Peace agenda for over a decade. He leads UPI efforts to transform systems and the lives of individuals to create community peace and safety and end the devastating cycle of mass incarceration. Mr. Rejon began his work in 2008, building the Urban Peace Academy as a platform to train gang intervention and street outreach workers, law enforcement, community stakeholders, and public officials on implementing violence reduction strategies focused on redefining community safety and health. Fernando began his career as a trained community organizer with over 18 years experience working in the nonprofit sector. He holds a BA in sociology and communication studies from the University of San Diego, an MA in Chicano studies from California State University, Northridge, and a certificate from the Stanford Graduate School of Business Executive Program for Nonprofit Leaders. Welcome, Fernando.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here with various colleagues throughout the country that are very committed to this work. Okay, so I'll start back. I'll go back 18 years. I'm going to start in 2006. In 2006, the Urban Peace, we pulled together this report called A Call to Action, which was an audit on the 30-year war on gangs in LA. That was led by Susan Lee and Connie Rice at the time. What that report led to was to the creation of a comprehensive violence reduction strategy that focused not on arresting and incarcerating individuals, but focused on reducing violence. So that piece was essential to really shift the paradigm and understanding of how do you address violence. You cannot arrest your way out of it. You have to treat it as you would any public health outbreak. Just like malaria, COVID, you don't just lock everybody up. You don't just extinguish everybody. You have to make sure that you are treating violence as it spreads. So in order to build out the community-based infrastructure, we had groups that went out to Boston. We had groups that went out to Chicago at the time and looked at the various models there. Came back to LA, talked to everybody and anybody that was doing the work on the ground, also public sector leaders. And the consensus is that there needed to be a training academy that helped professionalize the field of gang intervention, as we called it, but also a standardized curriculum, a curriculum that folks could agree on. At the time, we had a training, but the training was not necessarily led by street level practitioners. And it also did not have a coherent curriculum that really focused on building the field to implement a comprehensive violence reduction strategy. There was, we had some challenges like many other cities early on regarding people playing both sides. People saying they were doing gang interventions, but selling guns or drugs out of their car. And what that did is it hurt the credibility of intervention in the city when that would happen, because the LA Times would say so-called gang intervention workers. There would be these statements that said they really questioned the validity of the violence intervention field. In 2008, we launched a pilot session for the Urban Peace Academy in LA. We pulled together about 20 practitioners, a lot of veterans from the field, but also some newer folks that were just entering the field. And we put together a curriculum development work group led by practitioners, people who have been on the ground doing the work. They put together a curriculum that we piloted with the 20 individuals. We received feedback from all those 20 individuals who were paid stipends to participate. And we really cultivated a curriculum that was reflective of the realities of the streets in 2008. And again, things change rapidly, right? Things change from sometimes month to month. And so what we did in 2008 is not necessarily what we do now, because the streets and the politics have evolved. But in 2008, having a platform that intervention workers can come to receive certification was critical. In 2010, we were awarded the city contract to certify all city contracted intervention workers. So if you wanted to work under a city contract, you had to come through the academy to receive certification, or you could not work under a city contract. But we also opened it up to other individuals who needed certification training to make sure that we built the bench of intervention workers who could be hired to be out there keeping peace in the streets. The other piece is really accountability. In 2010, we started the LA Violence Intervention Training Academy, which is the city entity. Urban Peace Institute was contracted to provide services for that. We call La Vida. The training is 140 hours. We also have a professional standards committee, Black and Brown intervention leaders throughout the city, who screen individuals in and screen them out. Part of the quality control mechanism needed is that if you're going to be there and sit through the 140 hours, we have to make sure there's a level of readiness. And it's not necessarily a readiness of kind of literacy skills, but a readiness to go through the process and commit to the 140 hours. Folks have to be on time. We start on time, we end on time. We have a very disciplined approach to how we go through this training so that folks understand the importance and kind of professional aspects of this field. We screen people out to make sure that they learned the key core concepts. And there's some people that didn't really make it through the screening out because they weren't ready because of behaviors or certain issues that they were having, where we had to hold their certification back. And sometimes either they had to take the class again, or we made sure that they had to follow up with some mentorship and assignments in order to receive the certification. It's really easy, I think, sometimes to just certify anybody and everybody to be intervention workers, but there is such a kind of key importance to who intervention workers are and what they do. Their license to operate or their credibility in the field is essential to the work that they do. And a lot of times if that is compromised or they don't have a license to operate, it could be detrimental to the field, but to the communities that we're serving. And so how we built the academy infrastructure was to make sure that we screened everybody in and out, but also that it was Black and Brown. In LA, we have Black and Brown dynamics. We have to make sure that we're intentional about making sure the classes are balanced, but also that they're balanced with instructors, Black and Brown instructors, to make sure that while the core of intervention is the same, the cultural nuances based on the different regions of LA and the street politics there are different. And so we always have to take that into account when we're building out the curriculum. In 2011, we started being asked to come out to provide technical assistance to different cities across the state, but also across the country, where we would train intervention workers, but also help them build out programs and support cities in their thinking on how to build out comprehensive safety strategies. So the purpose of the academy really evolved into not only a training, to be a training piece to professionalize a workforce and create a standardized curriculum, but it also became an organizing and advocacy platform. So where intervention workers from different parts of the city could come together, talk about their needs, and put together an agenda for saying, hey, this is what we need. This is what we need regarding self-care. This is what we need regarding pay. So it was an important platform to unite people around a profession, but also be able to leverage voices and create leadership for the field that are veteran intervention workers or people that are actually doing the work on the front lines. So in order to build the CVI workforce, not only do we certify and train people, but we have to make sure that we're building the field with intention and that there is a common understanding of what we do and what we don't do. In particular, the role with law enforcement and the firewalls that exist between community intervention workers and law enforcement. A lot of times those get blurred, and we had to be very, very clear. That's why we developed standards of conduct and practice that are very, very clear about what an intervention can do or an intervention worker cannot do in order to keep intervention workers safe, and also for public sector leaders to understand what the limitations are of intervention and what they can expect and not expect from intervention. So being very, very clear about having those standards is really essential to our work. So building leadership in the field is important. A lot of the folks who have gone through the class come back and to become instructors, but they go through a training in order to do that. Not only do they train in LA, but they also train across the country with other partner organizations. We've had the privilege of supporting Chicago as they were building theirs out, and we have this and Peace for DC as well, and a lot of conversations with Rachel. But there's also, we have like an informal exchange program with Chicago where, we fly a lot of Chicago folks out to come and train our folks and share about what they're doing in Chicago. And of course, we always share, what's happening in LA. And part of how we move and build out our training academies or any of our technical assistance is the attempt is not transactional, it's always transformational, to build synergies with other cities in order to strengthen the overall impact of community violence intervention workers on the ground. I think that there needs to be a strong level of commitment. When you put intervention workers on the ground, you have to make sure that you invest and you support intervention workers to ensure that they have their needs taken care of and addressed. It's very, very difficult to be out there without a badge or a gun and to, call for peace and go against the grain. We're asking men and women to go out there and put their lives on the line, but also their traumas, to expose their traumas, re-expose them to traumas out there. If we do not have the resources to support them and ensure that they are safe and they are protected and that they do have support when it comes to some legal challenges, we're not doing our job. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. Very, very, very insightful. Our next panelist is Vaughn Bryant, who is the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Peace Initiatives, MPI, a division of Metropolitan Family Services, which features a team of professionals working in partnership with community-based and citywide organizations to coordinate, support, and sustain comprehensive services designed to heal communities that have experienced the highest levels of gun violence. Core specialties include the Metropolitan Peace Academy, behavioral health, workforce readiness, legal aid, and street outreach supervision. Mr. Bryant previously held leadership roles with the Chicago Park District, Chicago Public Schools, where he developed the Safe Passage Program, the NFL, and Stanford University. Mr. Bryant has a BA in sociology from Stanford University and holds a master's degree in marital and family therapy from Northwestern University. Welcome, Mr. Vaughn Bryant.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Appreciate you guys including me. I'm gonna share a couple of slides myself. Here we go. Let me start there. So Metropolitan was asked to convene what is called Communities Partner for Peace, which is a group of local organizations that got together in 2016 to figure out how we could do some things differently to curb the violence. So if you think from a timing perspective, in 2015, that's when Laquan McDonald happened and the tape was released. And, that was pretty controversial. It was a police involved shooting. And then in 2016, we had a record number of homicides that year, or somewhere close to 780 homicides in the city of Chicago, which was a record in a number of years. And at the time, Cure Violence was still operating with about $6 million that was publicly funded coming from the state of Illinois. And so Metropolitan is a legacy nonprofit. It doesn't have a background in violence intervention work, but it is one of the oldest nonprofits in the country, definitely the oldest in the state of Illinois. And when I say legacy nonprofit, I mean coming from the Great Chicago Fire. So we were asked to convene this group, CP, which is CP4P now, and they had agreed to do three things: start, a street outreach operation, provide case management services, and do Light in the Night, which is our place-based strategy, which is similar to Summer Night Lights in Los Angeles. And then we later added victim services to that suite of services that happen at our local level. So when you see this map, in 2017, we started off in 9 communities, working with 8 organizations. And since we've grown to, as of today, 15 organizations working in 28 communities across the city of Chicago. And, what I would say is, Metropolitan, we try to operationalize all of the things that our CP4P partners want to see and want to happen as we build out our ecosystem. So the first thing they asked for was behavioral health services. And so in 2019, we built out a behavioral health team that is deployed throughout our 28 neighborhoods, serving our partners. So when we hire those folks, at least in the beginning, we would interview them, but they would also have to have an interview with our community partner that they would be hosting, so they were comfortable with the people we were hiring to serve them. Next, we started our workforce development program. And for us, that was really just a small job readiness training that we did, but we really were trying to sort of feed the existing ecosystem of workforce development, because a lot of that work happens in the city of Chicago. Then we added our Justice Corps, which is a team of lawyers that provide civil legal aid services. We do organizational development, so a lot of capacity building happens. So at the organizational level, so some of our organizations, were under $1 million when we started, some big, and everything in between. But making sure there's someone there to help with systems and processes, do actually a lot of the things that Kimberly talked about, the CVI Leadership Academy does. We do that work in terms of fiscal stewardship, in terms of hiring practices, getting people ready for audits, making sure that grants management systems is in place. Like, we actually audit our partners just to make sure they're in the practice of keeping good books. And then we also help them with data management as well. So understanding how to enter data, with fidelity, and making sure we provide capacity building on that, and serve as the liaison between our partners and our evaluation partner in Northwestern University and the Corners there. So at the bottom right of this slide, you'll see this is kind of what we call our cluster model, where each of our CP4P organizations has a program officer that provides that organizational development, a behavioral health liaison, a data analyst, a staff accountant that is, helps them with vouchering and making sure we get their reimbursements, a staff attorney, and a field manager. Now, each field manager is a graduate of our Metropolitan Peace Academy, which you guys have heard about some other academies, so I won't go too much into that. But they also provide the technical assistance out on the field. So they're former outreach workers that have LTO that goes to multiple communities, and they have the credibility to oversee the outreach operation that is happening on the street on a nightly basis. So that is really the infrastructure we've built. In addition to, what you see on this slide, we have, as part of our ecosystem, a relationship with 3 hospitals, Advocate Christ, University of Chicago Medical Center, and Stroger Hospital, where we do cross-training with those entities. They've sent trauma recovery specialists through our Peace Academy, but we also do a training where our outreach workers understand how the hospital system works. And we actually were just awarded a $1.1 million from the federal government to continue that work with UCM and Advocate Christ. And, it allows for us to do our work at the bedside of, shooting victims that are street involved. We also recently launched what we call our professional understanding training with Chicago Police Department, where we have a cross training where they understand more about CVI and our outreach workers understand more about, CPD, so that if we show up on a scene that we know what they do, they know what to expect from us, and that we know how, communication channels happen, what the do's and don'ts are, so that we can coexist in the public safety ecosystem. So we like to say we're building a civilian infrastructure for public safety, and that we're a part of the public safety ecosystem and trying to build, the right understandings and collaborations to continue to curb violence in the city of Chicago. I'll stop there, and we can continue on with the show.
Thank you, Vaughn.
Yeah.
For your presentation. So we're going to open it up for a panel discussion, and I want this conversation to be much more engaging and interactive. I'm not directing any specific questions to each one of you individually, but I do think this is an opportunity. Thank you, Marcus. I do see this as an opportunity for us to engage in a robust conversation around several of the things that you have raised in your panel presentations. So I'm going to start here because I've heard this word used continuously through this conversation, and I often use it myself, ecosystem. So I'm throwing this out to all of you. What does the ecosystem in CVI mean to you? And are there parts of it that do you think that should be built out? And how important is it for the ecosystem to be communicating with other entities within this ecosystem? And how do we keep those lines of communication open? So let's start with defining the ecosystem or what that means to you.
I mean, I guess I would define it as anyone who plays a role, at least as it relates to our work in public safety and trying to, keep our people safe, at all levels is how I would define it. So at the highest level.
I mean, I see it as an interrelationship between entities that contribute to safety and health. And speaking to LA, when I think of an ecosystem, at the core, when you're trying to address violence, is of course there's law enforcement that has the punitive approach and a lot of times the mass incarceration strategies, but building out a credible system that can disrupt and reduce violence and interrupt it at its core, at the street level, is really the core, the kind of the tip of the spear. Behind all of that, there's many other things. There's the cognitive behavioral interventions, there's the victim services, there's the hospital-based services, there's safe passage, getting kids to and from school, there's community organizing. There are the multiple public sector entities, whether it be foundations or whether it be the housing authority, whether it be local government, community council districts or aldermen in Chicago, that need to be involved and at the forefront of safety. The ecosystem is building out the interrelationship between leaders and organizations or entities that have resources that contribute to a mission of reducing violence and increasing community safety to broaden the understanding of what public safety is. Right now, the public safety narrative is dominated by law enforcement alone. We have the opportunities and ability to broaden the conversation to include a community safety ecosystem that is non-punitive and that relies on building up a workforce based on a value system that aligns with the mainstream, but is divergent from the culture of law enforcement.
In agreeing with everything my colleague stated, this is Marcus, I would just add that, you know, I think this ecosystem has to be derived of all entities that are impacted by violence. And so one of our focuses, along with every entity mentioned, is our business community, making sure that businesses see themselves as a part of the solution. I think that we have options. I know here in the District of Columbia, you know, where we had a bad year. We got to own that. Last year was not one of our shining star years in terms of violence, but businesses have an opportunity to either become a part of the resolve, or they can pack up their doors and move to Virginia or Maryland. And we want them to stay. We want them to be a part of the resolve, not just through belief in the work, but also by investing in the work as well.
So I want to use that to pivot to that topic, Marcus, because I think that's an interesting, I think that's an interesting place to pivot to. How much do the CVI leadership academies and the training academies, how much do you include business and having discussions with who runs the local economy in your cities? How much conversation are you having with the business community regarding CVI work?
I'll jump in quickly. Yeah, here we're working close with our business community. The entity here in the District of Columbia that we are most locked in with is the Federal City Council. And, you know, we're grateful tomorrow to be hosting a forum with them for the very purpose of delivering the message about what community violence interruption is, how this is being impactful in so many cities across the United States, and really giving them an opportunity and being fair to the fact that some in that business community only know one way of reducing crime. And so we want to be fair and give them the opportunity to learn more about another way, and then take the conversation further and deeper. So we are being very intentional about that at Peace for DC.
In Chicago, I think we're fortunate in that we have a very civically engaged business community. So one organization in particular, the Civic Committee, has really come together in support of scaling CVI. It's called SC2. I'm sure Vaughn can share more about some of those specifics, but it really is being led by the Civic Committee, coalition of hundreds of business leaders trying to raise public and private funds in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars for CVI. So I think we're really fortunate. And to that point, one of the things we're hoping to do, to continue to do as part of the CVI Leadership Academy, is shine a light on the power of that type of coalition as we're bringing in other students from around the country. I think, being very strategic with how you engage business leaders in your city and pointing to, existence proofs in places like Chicago is something that we would love to see replicated. The other way that we're thinking about engaging the business community is around leadership and management. That's a sector, the private sector has invested, billions of dollars in developing their leaders and their managers. And of course, CVI work and the work in the CVI ecosystem is different than running a private company, but in some ways there are transferable skills. And the goal of the academy is to also ensure that leaders have transferable skills. And by bringing in leaders from the business community, we think that's one way to get them involved and to be proximate with CVI leaders, and hopefully to give a different perspective on management and strategic decision making that you might not get from academia or from practitioners in the CVI field.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, I would also say, just from building off what Kim was saying, getting our business leaders to relook at their hiring practices, because there are plenty of jobs out there that, we know not only our CVI folks would, but our participants could do, given a chance to, be healed, skilled, and trained into existing jobs. So that's another commitment our civic committee has made, in addition to scaling CVI and also working with law enforcement on new practices as well.
Fernando, any thoughts?
Business community, definitely a gap in LA when it comes to engagement in the CVI field, but I think one thing to share is that public-private partnerships are essential. The public dollars a lot of times are limited as far as what you can do with the city or county state contract, but it can fund a lot of the core systems within the community-based structure. I think the private sector, whether it be business or foundations, allow for a lot of the innovation and experimental stuff that you need in order to build out the ecosystem. So cities cannot do it alone, and I don't necessarily trust cities to do it by themselves. So we need to ensure that we have private investment that can help scale these programs.
So I want to pivot a little. As a researcher, I'm putting on my research hat right now. As a Black researcher who does research on CVI, and we recently launched Black and Brown Gun Violence Research Collective. So I want to get your thoughts on what is the value of research to CVI and the importance of having researchers who are from the same communities where you're engaging in your work.
Well, I'll just start by saying, we've looked back at DC, and it's well known that DC had 88 homicides in 2012. And when I went to study that, I couldn't find any research that showed why we got down to 88. There were potential reasons, but there was no hard data. And that just solidified for me that moving forward, we really need to build that data to be able to show what works and how it works and what doesn't work, and learn from it. And we definitely, in terms of who is actually doing the leadership, it's critical that folks feel comfortable who they're talking with. And so to the credit of the work that you're doing, Dr. Richardson, helping people tell their stories in a thoughtful way, I think is really meaningful, and it speaks to not just the data and numbers, but how do we shape the narrative and help build awareness for this work and help people understand the individuals doing these jobs and the participant stories themselves, and what that means for public safety as a whole.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'm obviously quite biased, also coming from a research organization, but I'll share a few things. I think the first is over the course of our work, one of the programs that we've partnered on an evaluation of is Ready Chicago. And that was a long, deep partnership with 7 community-based organizations in Chicago. And over the course of that partnership, we learned a lot about the blind spots in existing data. We relied really heavily on data on arrests and victimization as an outcome, and that is an important outcome. But we also wanted to understand what are some of the experiences outside of those 2 specific measures that can let us know what else is needed in Chicago, but also around the country. So things like understanding what share of participants might need additional support securing housing. How can we rethink housing systems to be more accessible to those who might be at elevated risk of gun violence involvement? What are the behavioral health status quo programs, and how are they not currently serving the kind of men in the program? So we were able to expand our understanding of experiences as part of this research, and that was really driven by the partners at the various community organizations. And I think research is really just one part of the kind of tool in our tool belt as we're thinking about increasing awareness and understanding of what CVI is and how it works and why it's important. Going back to the previous question, it's been really interesting to kind of hear about how the standards that are kind of applied to traditional public safety systems like law enforcement are different than what we think of when we think of CVI. So being mindful that we're not that if we are going to kind of insist on research of CVI programs, that we're also holding the public sector, law enforcement strategies, the criminal justice system to that same standard, and being as transparent and as rigorous when we're thinking about whether we're getting the return on investment in those existing status quo public safety systems. So I think making sure that, as for example, the business community is asking for this data on CVI, that we're also asking for similar results from other parts of the criminal justice system.
I agree that the burden of proof weighs more heavily on CVI folks, but it's also nascent in research, right? We're building it up. And, for traditional researchers, really, it's, folks want the data and, we want the numbers. For community, it's about, we want trust. And so you have to bridge those two. And I think how researchers a lot of times are trained, they're not necessarily trained on building trust, they're trained on that. But it's also vice versa. It's a two-way street. Communities need to understand the importance of data and numbers in order to not only sustain, but scale services. But researchers also need to understand, how do you build trust? And so, Dr. Richardson, when you asked about, having Black and brown kind of leadership within the research field that, we support, we're trying to cultivate, is really essential to be able to make the connections and build some rapport with folks who are on the ground. They might not share the same experiences exactly, but knowing it is to walk the earth as a person of color, there's similar experiences there as well, right? If not the same. And so that's really essential to the CVI field. So in LA, we're working with our colleague, Dr. Shani Buggs, to help build something out in LA with all of our folks on the ground, with support of the mayor's office. We have Melvin Hayward out as a senior director of the grid office now. So we're really excited about what we're going to be able to do differently when it comes to research and demonstration of effectiveness in LA.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just the word agency, be in just exercising that, both from a research perspective and from leadership on the CVI side, being Black and brown, and understanding, what the boundaries are and where you can push, and, understanding collaboration and co-creation. And I think that, being someone who, has done a lot of program development in the city of Chicago, I understand sort of the responsibility I have to the community, but also the agency I have to influence, how research is done as well.
Great. So I want to talk a bit, Fernando, you raised the issue around advocacy and training CVI frontline workers and staff to be engaged in advocacy work, which I really think is like so critically important. Even as professors in our field, we're not trained to do advocacy work, to translate our research into advocacy efforts on the local or state and even federal level. Can you talk a little bit more, and all of you, the importance of training CVI workers and leaders, frontline workers and leaders in advocacy work, and why it's so critically important to be trained in that space to advocate for, whether it's an increase in salary or safety measure issues, or issues upstream issues which affect communities, which impact CVI work. So just for example, other social determinants of health, such as housing or having a felony, and the 40,000 collateral consequences that are associated with a felony record. Can you talk a little bit about why that training and advocacy is so important?
A lot of times there's gaps between frontline workers and advocates. And also below kind of the level of advocates, it's really the power building community organizing that can't be discounted as well. There's kind of traditional advocacy, which speaks for populations at the kind of higher level, whether it even be at the federal level, some of the state or county levels, but being able to have frontline practitioners speak authentically, directly to folks in power is essential. It's a vulnerable population that many times gets taken advantage of. In order to build power, you have to be able to unite the voices of workers on the ground and come up with a coherent agenda and speak in unison to decision makers. What it does is it gives credibility, but it also helps to protect the work on the ground. A lot of times decisions are being made at various levels that negatively impact our communities. If we are not there and intervention workers are not there speaking to their reality, a lot of times we're going to have the negative impacts on our field. So, and folks who are working on the ground, they don't have a lot of time to advocate. So they have to, you have to find funding, you have to develop, you have to create another career pathway for that. So say they're a veteran intervention worker, been doing work on the streets, now they're mentoring and training the next generation. They should also be paid to be trained as advocates to start speaking for their work and become the leaders in the field. So I think there's a piece there with advocacy that a lot of times is overlooked. It's one thing to advocate, all right, we got $6 million to fund CVI organizations, but that's only one piece. Yay, let's, celebration, press release, etc. Do those dollars really get to the ground? And when they get to the ground, how are they administered? And do those organizations have the ability to administer to those dollars? And are people actually getting the raises that we advocated for? So that's the other work that needs to be done that a lot of people don't look at as well.
Yeah, that's the part I wanted to highlight is there's advocacy in terms of the external, but there's also the internal and the practice of building a coalition and sticking together and sacrificing for the greater good so that when you are going out to advocate, that you're doing it as a united front, as a group that is stuck together. I don't think we would be where we are without our CP4P organization sticking together and operating as a united front to get city, county, state, and federal funding at the level that we're getting it. I mean, if in reality, it makes sense for a city, county, state to be able to fund one entity and get to a whole city. And that only happened because of that advocacy. But also before that advocacy happened, it was just sticking together as a coalition and then being able to see the result of that and advocate for sustaining that and carrying it forward. I would say that we're in a position to make CVI a part of the larger public safety ecosystem because of not only sticking together as a coalition, but now the advocacy that you are able to do now that you've, penetrated the system in a sustainable way year after year. And then now, we have a groundswell. And I just to tie it back to the work, if you think about, somebody like Eddie Bocanegra or George Matos or Chris Patterson, these are two of these folks were in our very first MPA cohort. One had a state position that was able to secure us funding with the state. You have Eddie Bocanegra at the federal level. You have George Matos, who's working on SC2. So people from the ground level that are former frontline people now in positions of leadership that you're advocating to people who actually understand your work and they represent the people that we serve as Black and brown people in our communities.
And the only thing I would add is it was really clear during our first cohort of the CVI LA, like how much of a need there is around supporting leaders with advocacy and different advocacy tactics. So huge shout out to Live Free, Dr. Antonio and Pastor Mike. I mean, they really immerse the students in that rich organizing tradition of Oakland, the Black Panther Party. And I think, we came away with a really solid understanding of like, what are the different levers and relationships? How do you gain access to influence your target? Who even is your target? How do you comb through these city budgets to make sure that when you have 5 minutes with the mayor and their staff person, like you're asking really pointed questions? So I think that was honestly one of the more popular of our weeks. It felt like it filled a need and addressed a gap. And it's exciting to kind of see how students are now taking some of those tools and applying it around the country.
Great.
I'll just add that I wholeheartedly agree. And at Peace Academy in DC, we have one class at the program that focuses on how to tell your story. And that's in terms of talking to the media and also advocacy. But there's so much more to do, and we appreciate hearing all the great efforts that are happening in Chicago and LA.
So I want to ask, how much do all of you learn from each other? what do you borrow? How do you guys communicate with each other to pull different pieces of knowledge and this is the next thing that we need to be doing? How do you all communicate with each other and exchange information?
Yeah, so I would start here and say that within a month of me sort of coming on here, I was able to spend about 4 days in Los Angeles, talking to police and CVI organizations in LA and understanding what the grid model was, but then also, hiring UPI as a consultant to help us, sort of launch our first training that we did, not necessarily as part of our academy, but just to get all of our outreach workers some base level of training. And then they worked with us on creating our own standards here in Chicago and sort of reviewing what we put together in terms of our curriculum. So I would definitely say in the beginning stages, helping us understand the language and, helping us, sort of at the macro level. But I think, one of the most important things is these things do have to be locally created so that there's buy-in and that it is customized to what you're doing in your local community. And then, the way we do things, definitely, like there's some things that we do differently strategically that we wouldn't know to even think about it, without having the LA example in front of us.
Yeah, there's definitely synergy that I think that we've built to where, I can call Vaughn at any time, text him and, hey, ask him a question about anything. And, when we first went out to Chicago, we were very intentional about saying, hey, look, we're here to share, but also we're here to take. And we'll give you whatever we have. And when you all take it to that next level, which they have, now they're sharing stuff with us that is going to help us scale up what we're doing in LA. And we're trying to build that with every city that we work with, starting more conversations with folks in New York about this as well. It's really important to the field that it's not transactional, is that the relationships that we build over the years, because a mom crying in Chicago is the same as a mom crying in DC and in LA. It's the same thing. That's really what we're fighting against, and how we engage one another and how we push each other forward is what's going to make the difference 10 years from now. If we're really building with intentionality, we're building with the idea of transformation and strength of relationships and being able to share and support each other and celebrate each other's victories. A lot of times we don't get to celebrate a lot. We're always pushing. We have a lot to do, but just celebrate each other. And whenever, we're in each other's presence, it's like, let's make sure we get dinner as a group and really try to cultivate a field that is going to be dedicated to pushing to the long-term mission of ending violence and building a community safety infrastructure that has huge impact, more impact than law enforcement on public safety.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about is like leaders learning from leaders. And as I said, the instruction that we're delivering as part of the Leadership Academy, I think is really important, but the network of students and like the learning that they're doing amongst each other has been just like truly spectacular to see. As an example, one of our students was involved in Chicago's FLIP program, talked about that over the course of the cohort. And during the capstone presentations, the number of people that cited the kind of work in Chicago, and they're now trying to pilot that in other cities, like just to see this, like cross-pollination of ideas and like riffing off it for the DC context or Los Angeles. I think like leaders learning from leaders is like really what we're hoping to accomplish. And even like within the cohort, that's already starting to happen. And obviously, like we're keeping an eye on what's happening in terms of the other academies and institutes. I think as there continue to be advances in the field, and okay, we need to focus on like this, or like certain like modalities of learning. We're continuous learners ourselves, so we'll be eagerly awaiting the kind of readout from others.
And I think I've already talked about how heavily we've leaned on UPI and Metropolitan Police Academy when we were getting started. But we continue to keep the communication lines open. And I'm always so excited when I see the emails from MPA and UPI, see what they're doing next, what the successes are that they have going on, and how we can continue to learn from other groups across the country. And it's just part of this whole ecosystem again of building up CVI. And we see the workers in our class kind of realize when they get to class, wow, I'm part of something bigger. This is not just me in my one neighborhood. This is happening across the city, and there are people like me who want to see the violence stop in the same way I believe it can stop. And at a bigger level, it's exciting to see this happening across the country.
So I have a question or example that's more specific to DC, but I want to get your thoughts about this. So at this point, under our Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, we've had an interim director now since May, and we've had considerable turnover in terms of that position. I think at this point we've had maybe four directors. 2 were interim, and then two were permanently hired. And so at this point right now, we have an interim director, and I always think about, as we're having this discussion in DC regarding the merging, because we have 2 CVI street outreach programs, and there's now discussion to merge the 2 programs, regarding the pool of people that we bring in to lead these organizations. And many times at least from my own experiences, and I may be naive and not know the extent of how many people were involved in the target pool of candidates, but how important is it to pull someone in to these interviews at these very high level positions that may have started as a street outreach worker, and kind of they move through the system to ultimately, we have a pool of people that we're including that have gone through these training academies that are prepared to lead CVI organizations at that high level. How important is that?
Yeah, I would say it's extremely important because someone has to understand the language of the front line and be able to translate that to the powers that be who are making the decisions in government. And there's no greater person than somebody who has the experience of an outreach worker to do that. So our easy example would be a Norman Kerr, who started his career at Ceasefire, and worked his way up, and ultimately became the director of violence intervention for the city of Chicago. Or, like I mentioned earlier, somebody like Eddie that's working at the federal level, or Chris Patterson working at the state level, all have been outreach workers. And so I think that our FLIP initiative wouldn't be publicly funded without Chris being there. We know that. And then, our first city money came because Susan Lee and Norman were both at the city at the time. So, being able to articulate it is extremely important. And then it's up to us as, the practitioners to be able to deliver, when called upon, and be good stewards when we do get that funding to make sure it's a good investment of taxpayer dollars to justify that investment.
I just want to add one more question to that. How important is it that we're engaging city leaders in that conversation to understand that there's a pool of qualified candidates who are actually coming from these leadership academies that should be considered when we're thinking about who will be the next leader of CVI for the city?
How do somebody else talk?
It speaks to the importance of academies and having kind of levels of training. I think the CVI LA, the Leadership Academy out of Chicago, University of Chicago, is this national training for leadership at a national level. And there's prerequisites to that, right? So in order to be able to be trained as a national leader, you have to have, a higher level of work at the local level. So, leading an organization, being a program manager, higher level, not just necessarily a frontline worker. The Peace Academy, we train frontline workers, and then we train leaders who become instructors. I think it's it's incredibly frustrating when there's so much turnover and you have to kind of re-educate somebody and you're starting from scratch.
Right.
It's a lot easier, as Vaughn said, when you have somebody in there that already knows the language and it's such an easier conversation and they have their own challenges internally. Now, to get the public sector to say, hey, we're going to invest in this people that might have a record, that's a huge challenge as well. There has to be a commitment and a shift in values of an administration to say, we're willing to, quote unquote, take a chance on this person. However, also when they're in there, we can't leave them alone, meaning to fend for themselves. We have to be able to back them up, whether that's through advocacy, whether that's through foundations, making sure that, they're supported, that, supports them in helping to fundraise for the innovative work that they want to do beyond maybe what they're doing in the city. So there's multiple aspects to it. The biggest challenge is getting public leaders to really shift their lens when it comes to people who are coming from the field and to invest in them.
So I want to put a finer point on one of the things Fernando talked about in terms of, not only having frontline experience, but elevating throughout. And so I think to the point you're getting to, Joseph, not only is it important for us to let them know there's a pool of candidates, but we have to be intentional about giving people opportunities to speak at, conferences and to speak, in city government or county government or state government, so that we're putting them out front so that they can actually advertise their wares and build their own relationships and not try to hold on to people. Like we need, in order for this system to grow, we need people to advance outside of our organizations into the different opportunities that are out there, because we're building a sector. It's not all about one organization, it's about the whole sector. And we have to see that as a benefit to all of us when people move to different opportunities. As hard as it is, because it is a sacrifice, especially for our local organizations, but it's a necessary sacrifice.
And I would hope that over the course of bringing leaders, like city leaders, foundation leaders, business leaders into our academies, that they will be able to kind of develop relationships, understand, okay, what's being, discussed, like how are these leaders being prepared to take that on in the future. I would hope that over the course of bringing them into the academies, we can also build some of those partnerships so that when they do have an opening, it's like, okay, I need to contact the alumni of the Urban Peace Institute. Let me make sure that this opportunity is being disseminated within that network. And that's kind of already happening. Fortunately with us, we have a really nice group chat with our first cohort, and there are opportunities being, discussed over there. Our city is looking for this type of a thing. Is anyone here interested? Or do you know of someone who might be interested? So as these leaders continue to be in community with each other, I'm hoping that the kind of network effect will help to make sure that we're getting the right people into those really important spots.
And I laugh just because it's such a small pool that it's almost like a draft. And it's like we're like baseball or something, right? But for example, Danny Zamora, who went through the CVI LA program, graduated, we supported him, letters of recommendation. Right. And then he came back and now he's the assistant director at the grid office with the mayor's office, right? So, and I met him at our first training. He was part of one of our first cohorts in LA when he was still on the ground working in the housing developments, doing intervention, right? And so, but to me, that's what makes this, that's the importance of this work. The accolades or anything like that, it's really watching people grow and having the opportunity, knowing where Danny comes from and where he's been to where he's at now. It's for me, it's just this is what this is about. And so Vaughn is absolutely right. We have to be able to support each other, but also provide opportunities for folks to grow and support them and don't leave them hanging.
Right. No, I appreciate that. I mean, right now in DC, I've been in numerous discussions regarding leadership for CVI, and I think I speak for a lot of CVI workers that the person needs to be, very DC based, DC centric. I think in the culture of DC, you're not going to get very far without having a native Washingtonian and someone that's kind of come up through the ranks that people within the CVI space can respect. And so, with these conversations I'm having, at a higher level, I hear pulling people that are from outside of the city. And I just don't think that would work. I don't think it would work in many other places as well. So really having kind of that organic homegrown talent is critically important in the CVI space.
Yeah, I would argue that it's a combination. I'm not from Chicago, and I do know that, part of there is a criticism of the position I hold, not being from Chicago, and I'm okay with that because I've been here long enough and I think I've done enough things that it's not a big deal, but it does, mean that I operate with a particular perspective, knowing that I'm not from here and making sure that my team, reflects, the majority of Chicago. But, there are going to be outsiders that bring a particular perspective and skill set that can still be valuable to the work. So we just have to be mindful of not being too insular that we miss out on, folks who can be positive contributors.
So I'm going to pivot a bit and ask you a few questions that have come in. And so one of them I think is really interesting to discuss. Can you all share some of the hard and soft skills you think are important for CVI?
From a soft skill perspective, I think you gotta be able to engage with people. You have to be a relationship builder, and I think you have to have a level of authenticity for people to trust you. Because I think outreach work is a lot about building relationships and influence, positive influence. And I think from a hard skills, I think I would argue professional maturity to me is something that can be gained over time in terms of having perspective, knowing what fights to choose, what not to choose, having some restraint. Like, I think we sometimes look at that as soft skills, but I would say that is something that can be developed. And like, when I think about like our nonviolence principle, that's not just about not shooting or fighting or anything like that. There's interpersonal injuries and how you talk to people and how you listen, assuming positive intent. All of those things, can be learned as well. And I think those are, things that are important. Having a balanced approach, being able to, to be able to mediate a conflict, you have to be a good listener.
Right.
And you have to be able to communicate at the level of the people that you're talking to. So those were the things that come to mind off the top.
Yeah, building off of that, like social emotional intelligence, good communication skills, those are really important as the credibility and trust, I think.
For us, we talk about, and this is a term that we break down in the academy, but the level of self-differentiation. How differentiated are you from your past? And that for us is part of that professional maturity, right? And political maturity. You got to navigate some of the politics a lot of times as well. But that's a really important aspect that can help be an indicator of how close people could get to relapse. We do have people that relapse, and we have to work with them, but it's also supporting them on their self-differentiation. And the other thing is just understanding of we'll call it a parallel governance system. There is a street culture with its own governance system, values, cultures, norms. Understanding that and being able to tap into that and have a level of fluency there, as well as the fluency of the mainstream that we operate in to fund this work, is that you have to have kind of that dual fluency on the street, and then to become more professional and to move in your career within this field is that you start to develop the other fluencies as well. And so that, I think, for us is the LTO, which is that street fluency, is really, really important to keep yourself safe, navigate, keep others safe, make sure that you're unbiased and knowing how to navigate those systems. Then on the other side of it is that you have to develop the fluency on the other side, which we talk about in the academy as well. Is like you have to know both, and that's going to make you more effective as a peacemaker, but then also as a professional within the CVI field as you move forward.
Yeah, so part of what he's talking about, like this behind me, it says position yourself as a learner. And, I think part of the importance of that from a professional perspective, when you've operated on sort of street justice and street rules, that can be very different than HR rules once you're a professional at a professional
Right.
organization,
Right.
and being able to learn that the way I might handle a situation on my team, you know, when I'm working for an organization is different than how I might handle it, you know, at the street level. And the other thing I want to point out too, when Fernando talked about self-differentiation, you know, one of the research questions that I think, you know, I think about is, can you self-differentiate, have success, and keep your same network intact? Sometimes people have to have a whole different network of just moving in a different direction in order for them to fully mature into the person that they want to be.
Right.
Having a sports background is the same thing you talk about with athletes. Like sometimes they feel like they want to bring their community with them, and
Right.
sometimes you can't. And so, you know, I think that's something that is always of interest to me too, in terms of that self-differentiation, but also wanting to stay true to where you came from and not be disrespectful to the people that helped you get where you are.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, in the academy, we talk a lot about imposter syndrome, right? And what does that mean for people who have gone through the ranks and now they're moving up and they're really at a high administrative level? Like, do they actually experience that imposter syndrome as well in their
And do the people who have known you allow themselves to see you as a different person if you have in fact made that change? Because sometimes it's our own people that won't, you know, allow for the change in their own minds, and which, you know, makes it tough as well.
Exactly. So here's another question. I think it's definitely one I would like to hear from all of you. What can you do when elected and appointed leaders in a city or the police commissioner don't understand or don't believe in community violence intervention and only want to invest in government-run systems or traditional public safety policing and prosecution?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
What can you do when elected and appointed leaders in a city or the police commissioner don't understand or don't believe in CVI and only want to invest in government-run systems or traditional public safety policing and prosecution?
Yeah, so I would say that you have to, you know, shift to the philanthropic community. I don't think we would be where we are without the philanthropic community deciding to go deep on CP4P and Ready when they did. So when we started, for the first 2 years for us, we were fully funded with private dollars, philanthropic dollars, and it was only in year 3 that we got public money, and that was really because Cure Violence decided not to be a direct service provider anymore for, you know, various reasons, that we were able to secure that public funding. And I think it was the combination of those two things and the coalition sticking together that then influenced the public sector to get on board. So like once Susan and Norm got us money later on in that year, Cook County decided for the first time they were going to invest. So, you know, it builds on itself, but you got to have a starting point to prove it. And I actually don't think that's bad, because with the philanthropic community, you have time to test and figure out what works and what doesn't work. And it gives you a level of room for the growing pains that you don't necessarily have in the public sector. So by the time we got the public money, it's more of a collaboration, because the public sector for us, they've been learning with us and allowing us to have a lot of influence on, you know, what things look like, because, you know, we got the ball rolling pretty in a pretty advanced way before they got on board. So that would be, you know, what I would say.
I want to get Christy in. She has a question that she wants to ask. I want to make sure we get her in.
Right. And I just thought of a second question related to that. So and we know the Peace Academy, I think we have that's not a government funded project. It's philanthropy and community funded. And that's the same way for both LA and Chicago. Primarily.
So yeah, when we started, it was fully private, but now we do get some government funds through the Illinois Department of Human Services that funds organizations that do CVI work, and as their training and technical assistance provider, they can fund people to be in a cohort.
Okay. Fernando, if you wanted to respond as well.
So ours started out privately funded, then the city funded it, and then it went privately funded again. Now the city's looking to fund it again. So it's back and forth. But the city gives it a lot of that credibility as well, being a city certification, which is
And then the question I had, and I think this is for Vaughn. So you mentioned that you train police officers as well. And so can you talk, and maybe all of you, if you could talk about what you think the appropriate relationship is between CVI workers and law enforcement? And then Vaughn specifically, can you tell us what is the nature of the training that you provide to law enforcement?
Yeah, the nature of the training, I'll start there, is really around rules of the road of what the professional understanding is between police and CVI. So it's a scenario-based training where we may talk about, being at a shooting scene and, a police officer, calls out an outreach worker and how the outreach worker may respond, or should the police officer do that. Making sure we can kind of talk through the scenarios to talk about the implications of communications of an outreach worker with an officer on the street and what that might mean for both sides. So creating those rules of the road, making sure they know what the do's and don'ts are, really talking through, what makes an outreach worker credible and how, the police, sort of have to treat us in a particular space, but also understanding if communications happen, at what level is that communication happening and what types of things can be communicated. Because there's very little that CVI is going to communicate to the police. It's really more the police communicating with us and using us as a resource. Again, what the terminology we use is a professional understanding, not necessarily collaboration. We coexist in the space, but we have to understand each other's position in that space in order for us to coexist and get what we both want to get done on behalf of the community that we serve.
to briefly touch on the previous question and talk about the law enforcement pieces. Engineering political will is important. And Pastor McBride and Antonio will agree, power building, community organizing to compel public sector to start investing in this. There's also organizing at the philanthropic level, or you can organize with some of the political leaders that want to be champions of this work. The challenge with political leaders is that sometimes they have 4 to 8 years, well, at least in LA, like 4 to 8 years, and then then you get somebody new. But being able to get buy-in from the electeds or from community to build political will to begin investing in this is important. This is about compelling leaders to invest in this work and saying that it's valuable and that it works. And I've seen it done multiple ways in different cities. But connecting it to law enforcement, when you do that with law enforcement, you have to train law enforcement. And when we started in 2009, we had to train law enforcement to create the socio-political space for intervention to be able to have breathing room. If not, you'd have intervention workers out there and police would be jamming them every time they had an opportunity. So if you do not engage law enforcement and train them on, and really law enforcement, there's 3 key things that law enforcement wants to know is, one is, how do I hold them accountable? What can I expect from them? What can I not expect from them? And then how are they trained? Because one thing law enforcement understands, they understand training. So we say, hey, they go through 140 hours of training, they're screened in and screened out. They say, okay, cool. Then we have the standards. We have 18 standards right now, but they're like the equivalent to us of like the 10 commandments. This is what we do. And 2 of them are, thou shalt not give information that incriminates or incarcerates anybody, right? Thou shalt not, give information on any community or group, because then you kill your credibility, right? And so those are key things that we need to have in place to make sure that there are clear firewalls with law enforcement, because if there is any information that is given to law enforcement, you jeopardize the credibility of the community-based infrastructure. And then it's no longer valid. And then it just goes back to default, AKA business as usual, which we are pulling away from. And so that's why we have to be very, very clear, not only for public sector and law enforcement on the do's and don'ts, but also for people who are not on board. with it, whether it be people behind the walls in prison or whether it be people in the streets that aren't with the peace thing and are saying, hey, look, these fools are giving information. It's like, no, this is what we train people to. This is what they can do. This is what they can't do. And if they're in violation of any of these commandments, then, or standards, then what we do is then they're out of bounds, right? And so we've used the standard document to help navigate and create space with public sector, law enforcement, and communities that are not fully bought in to say, this is the space that we occupy, and it's a gray space, and it's a difficult space to build when it is not there. Because everyone wants it's black or white. No, this is gray. And you're walking, they're always constantly walking a tightrope and cannot lean too far in either direction in order to maintain their credibility and effectiveness in the field.
And I'll just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rachel.
So yeah, DC Peace Academy has always been privately funded, which has, you know, afforded us flexibility and the ability to, you know, hone the curriculum the way that we felt like the community needed the most. But Fernando, you know, highlighted the need for sustainable funding sources and, you know, having government funding and support, you know, would allow us to train all of DC CVI workers, which would definitely be a benefit. On the other question, we have tried to develop a code of conduct similar to what Los Angeles has and tried to, you know, share that in the academy. But again, like as a private nonprofit, we don't have the authority to establish that as something that all DC CVI workers have to follow. And we also have a guest from law enforcement who comes to the academy one time for each cohort to talk with them, and so that they can learn from each other and understand, you know, what each other's role is and where the line is of communication.
We, in addition to the CVI Leadership Academy at the University of Chicago Crime Lab, we also have a Policing Leadership Academy, which was launched at the same time. They are, I would say, like sister academies, so different staff, different curriculum, but one of the goals of, or kind of one of the foundational aspects of the curriculum for the Policing Leadership Academy is to infuse a trauma-informed lens throughout, so that police, and these are, you know, police leaders, so think of district commanders or precinct captains. So they're going through a similar 5-month academy. So we're really emphasizing the impact of trauma, not just on their officers and themselves as leaders, but the communities that they are policing. And we also want to emphasize the importance of CVI. So for example, some of those police leaders will do a capstone project on community violence intervention, like how to develop more robust partnerships in their city. For those leaders that are focusing on CVI, we've paired them with leaders like Charlie Beck, who come from a city that really has a solid kind of like understanding of that professional you know, relationship. So we, as part of that Policing Leadership Academy, are hoping to kind of get to that mid-level management of police leaders, because in many ways, like as those leaders are turning over, that can totally derail existing relationships in a community between CVI and law enforcement. So trying to make sure that that level of leadership is aware of the research, of the impact, of like the human cost of policing only strategies, and that they are aware of some of those really promising alternatives, such as CVI.
So we're almost at the end. I'm going to turn this over to Christy to wrap this up. But one of the things that Vaughn, you mentioned, I thought was really interesting, and just based on the law enforcement training. My colleague, Rashawn Ray, does a lot of training with law enforcement, and he uses VR. And I'm just wondering how much, just in terms of technology, like you just mentioned the scene where there's a CVI worker and they're the police, but how much are we, just as in the future in terms of training, going to integrate, for example, like VR into the trainings that we have? Just something that I've thought about. Potentially.
It's a good question. Like I actually through my, and I don't know if this is true for Kim as well, but we both are Leadership Greater Chicago alums, and we were able to do that sort of VR training where they, you know, are like on shooting scenes and you know, there's something that happens and you got to know how you're going to respond real time. And it's, you know, for their work, it makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure if our work necessarily makes sense that way, but I do know that Stanford University has like a VR thing around empathy training and putting you in a scenario with individuals and trying to figure out how to respond in an empathic way. So, you know, who knows what the future holds. We will be open to it all as we will continue to utilize every tool at our disposal to make sure we're building our workforce for tomorrow's America.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks to all of you. And I just want to highlight another comment that I saw in the chat and from Kenyatta Hazelwood, and she leads the hospital-based violence interruption efforts over at Howard, and just offering just hospitals as another avenue for advocating for this work too. So I appreciate her highlighting that. So just again, thank you all. It's great to hear and learn more about what we're doing to support CVI work here in the district and in other major cities. And I appreciate the fact that you all knew each other before we organized this, because you're learning from one another and supporting one another. And I'm sure that's essential in this work. And I just think in any field, right, if none of us had, you know, intentional professional development opportunities to help us grow the hard skills and soft skills, we would not be where we are today. And so I think it's definitely important for us to continue to invest in these individuals, and in recognizing just the challenge of doing this type of work, just personally and professionally, and trying to be effective at it. And like I said at the start, we know that this, if done well, that CVI work can really reduce gun violence. And I know we're all trying to do that in our respective cities. So thank you again for your participation, and thank you for the work that you do. I just want to remind you again, so when you log off of this session, there should be a survey that appears. Please do fill out the survey. It's just going to take a couple of minutes. We really do rely on your feedback. We don't try to do these webinars for our sake. We really want them to be for those in the community who are doing violence reduction work. The CJCC also focuses on juvenile justice, substance abuse, and mental health issues for those involved in the justice system, and as well as reentry work. So any of those three themes, if you think of something that you'd like for us to highlight in a webinar or a public meeting, please do fill out the survey and let us know. Lastly, I mentioned that we have a public meeting coming up this Thursday. For colleagues who are not in DC, you can join too. There's a online option, but we welcome you to attend in person at the DC Dream Center in Southeast. And we're going to have the directors of the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services and the Court Social Services Division. And they're going to talk about supervising system-involved youth in the community, what that entails, some challenges they experience, some successes they experience, and how they're really trying to rehabilitate and support our youth who get caught up in the system. So thank you so much again. I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoons, and take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.